Hello everyone and welcome to the garage. In today's video we're going to be diagnosing a Honda Accord. This is a 2005 model. We're going to be looking into an issue with the check engine light flashing and the engine shaking. This is a very common issue for Hondas that start to get into the higher mileage bracket around the 150,000 plus mile range. Fortunately, the fix is very easy. Let's get right into it. I'll show you every tool you'll need and how to diagnose this correctly and repair it using simple everyday tools. First off, let's go over the tools you need. A generic OBD2 scan tool. You can pick these up for as little as $20 on Amazon or eBay. You don't need anything fancy. All you need is a simple scan tool that will tell you the code that is set in your engine's computer. Next, you will need a 3/8" ratchet wrench. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a simple ratchet wrench. You'll need a short 3/8" extension. And finally, a 6mm hex head 3/8" socket. And any of these tools are available at your local auto parts store or your hardware store. As you can see, I'm using the Craftsman brand here. That comes from Lowe's nowadays, came from Sears back in the day. Anyway, you get the point. These tools are readily available and very affordable. You'll need a flathead screwdriver. And in the case of this vehicle, we will need 6 new ignition coils. Just to give you an idea of what all this costs, the ignition coils are about $200 plus tax. A basic scan tool is about $20 to $25. A screwdriver, ratchet, the extension, and the socket is all about $50 brand new. You can get these even cheaper if you price shop around, but just to give you an idea of what it costs to do this job, you're looking at about $300 for everything you see on this cart. To put that into perspective, most shops are going to charge you $150 just to diagnose your car. And then to do this job, probably another $500 at least. You can save yourself some money and build your tool inventory by doing this job yourself. So first off, what does a flashing check engine light mean? A flashing check engine light almost always means the engine is misfiring. It could also mean the engine is running too lean or running too rich. The check engine light generally flashes when there is potential damage to the engine's catalytic converter. Now we'll want to establish communication with the vehicle and read the codes. In order to do that, we will need to turn the ignition to the on position, but not start the vehicle. Next, we're going to locate the vehicle's OBD2 port. It's generally underneath the dash on the driver's side. Once we've plugged the scan tool in, we'll connect to the vehicle. And this varies by model, but for my particular scan tool, you press this connection button here. After about 10 to 15 seconds, the scan tool will establish communication with the vehicle and tell you what codes have been set. As you can see, we have a cylinder 2 misfire detected in the engine control module. There is one other code in there, but it's an emissions related code, so I'm not going to focus on that one at the moment. What we're focused on is this code here. P0302 is a misfire code. For those of you who have a scan tool that doesn't give you the definition, P0300 is a random misfire, and P0301 is cylinder 1 misfire, P0302 is cylinder 2 misfire, so on and so forth. Now, while cylinder misfires can be caused by a wide variety of concerns, the majority of misfires are caused by ignition issues. The first part you want to start with is the spark plugs. In this case, this vehicle has already had all 6 spark plugs replaced, so we know that the spark plugs are not the cause of the problem. The next part we want to look at is called the ignition coil. It generates the electrical current which jumps from one end of the spark plug to the other, igniting the air and fuel mixture inside the engine cylinder. The reason why ignition coils are generally associated with a flashing check engine light is when an ignition coil fails, it will not produce any spark at all, and that cylinder is completely dead. If a spark plug goes bad, it generally won't misfire unless it's under very heavy load. This can also apply to ignition coils, but generally what I've found in my experience is when a Honda has this problem, 9 out of 10 times it's your ignition coils that you see over there. And 9 out of 10 times when one goes bad, the others are going to go bad shortly. So it's a good idea to just replace all 6 of them while you're at it. If you only want to replace one ignition coil rather than buying all 6, you can figure out which ignition coil is bad, and if it is the ignition coil, by swapping it with another cylinder that is not misfiring. If the misfire moves from one cylinder to the other, you know you've got a bad ignition coil and you've identified the correct one. But in this case, we're going to replace all 6 and just be done with it. First things first, we're going to start with removing this little cover that sits on top of the engine with our flathead screwdriver. Turn these little tabs here 90 degrees counterclockwise and then lift the cover right off the engine. The next step is to remove the ignition coils. If you're new to this job, I recommend starting with the front of the engine. As you can see, it's very easily accessible. The bolts are easy to get to and the coils are easy to unplug. Start by disconnecting the first 3 ignition coils. Next, use your ratchet connected to the extension, connected to the 6mm socket, the hex socket here, as you can see, or Allen socket as it might be called. Now we're going to loosen the bolts that secure the ignition coils to the valve cover. Generally, once these have been loosened with the wrench, you can take them out the rest of the way by hand, and it's a lot faster. You might also find it handy to just use your little extension and socket, remove them this way. Or you can use what the professionals use, and that is a little impact gun. This is the fastest way. Now that we've removed all 3 bolts and disconnected the 3 ignition coils, they simply slide right out of the valve cover. Now, if we were replacing spark plugs, this is the time to do it. To replace a spark plug, you simply use a spark plug socket, a ratchet, and an extension. Remove the old spark plugs, put the new ones in, and tighten to the correct torque spec. It's really easy, but because they've already been done on this vehicle, we're going to skip that and get right to installing the new ignition coils. It really doesn't get much simpler than this. These ignition coils are not specific to any cylinder, so you can use any of your new ignition coils and place them into any of the slots here. Doesn't matter where they go, they all do the same thing, they're all the same part. You can aid the installation of the bolts by applying a small amount of WD-40 to the threads. This will just aid in the ease of the installation. As you can see, they're going in much smoother now. They're not squeaking, they're not binding. Just makes the job easier in the long run. It also reduces the chance of them seizing, so in case you have to do this job again, you don't have to worry about any broken off bolts or stripped threads. Now that we've started them by hand and got them snug, we're going to go back with our ratchet wrench and just get them snug. There's no reason whatsoever to get these very tight. They don't have to be tight. Just get them snug. Remember, you can always go back and tighten a bolt. If you over tighten it and break something, you're in a whole new world of trouble. Now we'll simply reconnect the ignition coils. And that's it. The first 3 are done. Now the 3 ignition coils on the back of the engine are going to be a little bit more difficult to get to because you have the engine firewall here and it's nowhere near as open. Nevertheless, it's still not that bad of a job because the intake manifold does not have to be removed to access these ignition coils, thus making your job much faster and much easier. Same thing, we'll loosen the 3 bolts here that hold the ignition coils in place. Disconnect the electrical connectors. And remove the bolts the rest of the way. Now another tool that you can use is an air or cordless ratchet wrench. This comes in really handy for jobs like these. I don't have one here at my home garage, so I'm just using the socket and the extension. But if you have one, once again, it will make the job much easier and much faster. Once the 3 bolts have been removed, just like the front, the rear ignition coils slide right out. 1, 2, 3. Same as before, it doesn't matter which ignition coil goes where, they all do the same job. We'll reinstall these new ones. Here's the first one. Second one. And the third one. Reconnect the electrical connectors. Make sure all the ignition coils are seated firmly onto the valve cover. Apply just a small amount of WD-40 to the threads. And start your bolts by hand. It's important to remember, if you're using power tools, to always start fasteners and bolts by hand. So the last thing you want to do is strip out the threads. This can cost you a lot of time and potentially money, and mostly headache later on in your repair if you strip out a thread or cross thread it. I'm going to run these down the rest of the way with my socket and extension before I tighten them up with the ratchet wrench. Now that I've gotten them snug by hand, I'm going to go back with the ratchet wrench and make sure that they're all snug. Finally, reinstall the engine front cover. Turn these 2 little flathead retainers 90 degrees clockwise. And congratulations, you're done. Now that we've replaced all ignition coils, we need to clear the codes from the computer to get the check engine light off. Turn the ignition on, and your scan tool should have an erase or clear function. In this case, mine is the yellow eraser button right here. Once it connects to the vehicle, I'm going to press this yellow eraser button, and this will clear the codes. I'll confirm that I want to clear and press the eraser again. And as you can see, the codes have been cleared. Finally, the moment of truth. Let's start the car. As you can see, the car is running smoothly, but we still have some warning lights on. Don't worry, these Hondas generally have warning lights that come on whenever the scan tool is plugged in. Unplug the scan tool, and the lights go away. You'll want to drive the vehicle around, make sure it runs smoothly and doesn't misfire and doesn't set any codes. And that's it. You've fixed your flashing check engine light. I hope you guys found this little tutorial video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next video.